You are far more capable of inflicting unimaginable harm than you could ever believe, not out of malice, but from a profound, almost involuntary deference to a perceived authority. This isn't a hypothetical. This isn't some fringe psychological anomaly. This is a cold, hard truth laid bare by one of the most unsettling experiments ever conducted. What if I told you that the very fabric of your moral compass could be overridden, not by force, but by a subtle, creeping influence that reshapes your perception of right and wrong? Today, you will grasp the chilling reality of obedience to authority. We will dissect the mechanisms that compel ordinary people to commit acts they would otherwise deem unthinkable, revealing why recognizing these forces is not just academic, but absolutely crucial for your psychological defense in a world teeming with manipulation. You will learn how the smallest concessions can snowball into catastrophic compliance, a pattern that silently dictates countless outcomes in your life. The seminal investigation into this terrifying phenomenon began in a sterile laboratory, with ordinary citizens responding to a newspaper advertisement. Picture this: a researcher, dressed in a grey technician's coat, conveys a calm, professional demeanor. Two volunteers arrive, one assigned the role of teacher, the other, unbeknownst to the teacher, an actor playing the learner. The goal, they are told, is to study the effect of punishment on learning. The teacher is then seated at an impressive console, fitted with a series of switches, clearly marked with increasing voltage levels, from 15 volts up to a terrifying 450 volts, ominously labeled XXX. The experiment begins. The learner, in a separate room, is tasked with memorizing word pairs. Each time a mistake is made, the teacher is instructed to deliver an electric shock, escalating the voltage with every subsequent error. What the teacher doesn't know is that the shocks are entirely fake. The learner's reactions, however, are agonizingly real. Grunts, cries of pain, pleas to stop, eventually complete silence. When the teachers hesitated, as many inevitably did, the experimenter, with unwavering calm, would offer a series of prods. Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. And finally, with chilling finality, you have no other choice. You must go on. The results were not just surprising, they were horrifying. Dr. Stanley Milgram's work at Yale University, detailed in his 1963 paper, revealed that a staggering 65% of participants delivered the maximum 450-volt shock. 65%. Think about that for a moment. More than 2/3 of everyday individuals, people with no history of violence, no malicious intent, were willing to inflict what they believed to be extreme pain, potentially even lethal harm, simply because an authority figure told them to. This wasn't about sadism, it was about the power of the situation. The core mechanism here is the agentic state, where an individual ceases to see themselves as acting on their own free will and instead perceives themselves as an agent carrying out the orders of another. Their moral responsibility feels transferred to the authority figure. They are just following orders. This transforms a horrific act into a mere task, a procedure to be completed. The slow escalation of demands, the small jumps in voltage, each one only slightly more severe than the last, creates a compliance trap from which escape becomes increasingly difficult. It's the psychological principle of foot in the door at its most insidious. Once you've agreed to a small request, refusing a slightly larger one becomes disproportionately harder. This gradual desensitization to their own moral boundaries is precisely what makes the next section so critical. This dark psychological mechanism, the one that turned ordinary people into unwilling executioners in Milgram's lab, operates undetected in your everyday life, shaping your decisions and relationships in ways you might never recognize. It's not just about electric shocks, it's about the erosion of your autonomy. Have you ever found yourself agreeing to something at work you fundamentally disagreed with, simply because your boss or a senior colleague presented it as a non-negotiable directive? Perhaps you were asked to cut corners on a project or to omit certain truths in a report. The initial request was minor, a small deviation from integrity, but then came another, slightly larger one, justified by the needs of the company or expediency. You are now in the agentic state, following orders, feeling a diminished sense of personal responsibility. Consider the dynamic in some romantic relationships. One partner slowly, almost imperceptibly, begins to dictate the other's choices. First, it's a subtle suggestion about what to wear, then a gentle request to spend less time with certain friends, then an expectation to share all passwords, all under the guise of love or trust. The victim, having complied with the small initial demands, finds their resistance worn down. Each step feels only marginally worse than the last, until they wake up and realize their entire life, their very identity, has been reshaped by another's will. This incremental escalation, brilliantly documented by psychologist Robert Cialdini in his work on influence, is a masterclass in covert manipulation. It's not a sudden command that triggers alarm. It's the slow, steady drip, drip, drip of demands that makes the water level rise without you even noticing until you're submerged. How many small compromises have you made, thinking they were harmless, only to realize later they set a precedent for much larger ones? Think about the media you consume. Narratives are often presented in a way that slowly pushes an agenda, normalizing extreme views or behaviors by presenting them as incremental steps from mainstream thought. A tiny, seemingly innocuous phrase here, a biased statistic there, a subtly framed image elsewhere. Each individual piece is too small to trigger outright rejection, but over time, through repeated exposure and the compounding effect of these minor, authoritative declarations, an entirely new perspective is adopted without conscious scrutiny. The viewer, much like Milgram's teacher, is guided step by step to a conclusion they might have initially found repugnant. It's a silent, powerful reshaping of collective belief. This mechanism doesn't need a lab coat or a shock generator. It uses the implicit authority of a title, a position, a relationship, or even just social momentum. The authority can be an ideology, a charismatic leader, or simply the perceived consensus of a group. And the shocks are not electrical. They are the compromises of your values, the erosion of your boundaries, and the suppression of your inner voice. This is the truly frightening part. It's not about monstrous individuals, but about a monstrous system that ordinary people participate in, often without ever fully recognizing the extent of their compliance. So, how do you defend against such a pervasive, almost invisible force? How do you maintain your moral sovereignty when the world is constantly trying to coax you into an agentic state? Here are 3 specific ways to build your psychological armor. First, recognize the incremental creep. The most dangerous manipulation doesn't announce itself with a roar, it whispers with a series of small, seemingly reasonable requests. Watch for the first domino. If someone asks you to do something that feels even slightly uncomfortable, something that nudges your boundaries, pause. Ask yourself, does this align with my values? Is this a small step in a direction I do not want to go? Manipulators rely on the fact that the first concession is the hardest to deny. Your internal signal to watch for is that subtle, nagging discomfort, the whisper of your conscience. Do not dismiss it as overthinking. It is your early warning system. Second, question the source of authority, always. Before you comply with any instruction or request, especially one that feels ethically ambiguous, ask 2 critical questions. What is the legitimate basis for this authority, and what are the potential consequences if I say no? In Milgram's experiment, the experimenter's authority was derived from the university setting and his scientific role. In real life, authority can be self-proclaimed, or based on social hierarchy, or even just sheer force of personality. If the authority is not legitimate, or if the consequences of non-compliance are not truly dire, you have far more agency than you might initially perceive. This is not about being rebellious, it's about informed autonomy. It's about not allowing a uniform, a title, or a confident tone to automatically override your judgment. Think critically. Third, cultivate an internal locus of control and a strong sense of personal responsibility. The agentic state thrives when individuals feel they are merely instruments. To counteract this, consciously reaffirm your role as the originator of your actions. Before acting, internalize the question, am I doing this because it is right or because I am told to? Remind yourself that you, and only you, are ultimately accountable for your choices. This mental shift is incredibly powerful. It reclaims your agency from the perceived authority and places it firmly back within your own conscience. Practice saying no to small, inconsequential things that you genuinely don't want to do. This builds your internal muscle for resistance when it truly matters. It makes it easier to refuse when the stakes are high. Understanding this dark corner of human psychology will irrevocably change how you perceive every social interaction. You will no longer see compliance as a simple act of agreement, but as a complex interplay of power, expectation, and internal moral negotiation. You will begin to notice the invisible currents of authority at play in every conversation, every instruction, every subtle social cue. The world will suddenly appear layered, revealing the subtle pressures that guide behavior, the unseen hands gently nudging others, and perhaps even yourself, towards actions that are not truly their own. You now possess the insight to distinguish between genuine consent and coerced compliance, allowing you to not only protect your own boundaries, but also to recognize when others might be caught in the grip of unseen forces. This isn't just about avoiding extreme harm, it's about reclaiming your everyday choices from the subtle clutches of influence. The truth is, manipulation is everywhere, but so is the power to resist it. Continue to sharpen your discernment, to question, and to stand firm in your own truth. There is always more to uncover. The next revelation will shift your understanding of interpersonal dynamics even further, unveiling another fundamental mechanism that shapes control in ways you simply cannot afford to ignore.